Hi everybody, Jennifer Schaus here. We're coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. and thank you for joining us in our webinar series today. On Wednesdays, we cover the FAR supplements, and we've got a great program lined up for you this afternoon. A little bit just about our newsletter and webinars. Right now, we've got over 540 complimentary government contracting webinars on our YouTube channel. You can get to the YouTube channel from our website. And we do offer sponsorship opportunities. And you probably found out about today's webinar through our newsletter. We now reach over 23,000, mostly federal contractors. And we also do have advertising options available there. You can shoot us an email to the hello@jenniferschaus.com if you've got questions. And I think this is a duplicate slide. Sorry about that. So about the series that we do on Wednesdays, all of our webinars are complimentary. They are recorded, so if you have to jump off at any time, you can catch the recording on our YouTube channel, usually within 24 hours, and you can also find it on our website. They're Wednesdays at 12 o'clock Eastern, and so we cover the Federal Acquisition Regulations, better known as the FAR, supplements. So our speakers are subject matter experts and government contracts attorneys. Today we do have a government contracts attorney who will be covering the EPA. So just to let you know where we've been and where we're going, in January we just started with an overview of the FAR. We went through most of the DOD. Today we're covering the EPA, and then we'll finish the series in August on the 24th, covering the Veterans Affairs. Again, those are Wednesdays at 12 o'clock. And then on the subsequent or the kind of corresponding Friday, we cover the same exact department or agency in a playbook series, which is more sales strategies, tactical approaches to doing business with that agency. And you'll probably hear some of that today as well. We also want to thank our sponsors who help make this webinar series possible. First up is the Virginia Ptac. For those that don't know, a Ptac is a Procurement Technical Assistance Center. So we want to thank the Virginia Ptac. The Virginia Ptac is based out of George Mason University in Fairfax and offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. So they don't just do federal. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. So if you're interested in learning more, you can use the links provided to explore what Ptacs can offer. The Federal Business Council, also known as the FBC, we want to thank them. They create and manage virtual and in-person meetings and events to connect appropriate industry and government appropriate industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works with mission-specific programs for a variety of agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40+ years, the FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and federal government. You've got contact information in the bottom center of your screen. We also want to thank Dastin. Dastin is an IT and cloud solutions provider working with corporations, the military, and government agencies to lower their costs, increase scalability, improve operational efficiency, and meet compliance regulations using targeted cloud-based solutions. Dastin is a certified partner of Oracle NetSuite, a premier tier Google Cloud partner, and a certified partner of Cisco, Virtue, AO Docs, and Authenticate. For more information about Dastin services or to schedule a complimentary consultation, you can email Joe Alston, and his email address is at the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And okay, so here we are. It's Wednesday, June 1st, and we are covering the FAR supplement on the Environmental Protection Agency. Our speaker today is Holly Roth, and she's with the law firm Poltonelli. Holly, I am going to mute myself. We want to thank you for being here. I know it takes effort and time to put the presentation together, so I'm going to be quiet and I'll just let you know, or you let me know when you're ready for your next slide.
Thank you, Jennifer, and it's a pleasure to be here and speaking to everybody today. Let's go to the next slide. So my start with this was because the EPA is such a large agency that purchases such a diverse array of products and services, that I thought that I would take the approach of making this a beginner's primer. They basically have $8 billion that they've obligated to date, at least that's according to USA spending, for a whole range of products and services. Next slide, please. So I started with EPA headquarters, and I thought I'd kind of give everybody who's joined us today an idea of what EPA headquarters buys, and then I'd break that out into the regions to kind of say what areas the 10 EPA regions focus on. Next slide, please. So the Office of Acquisition Solutions plans and awards and administers contracts for the EPA. And that's kind of where you want to know, because that's kind of the high level. And they provide service and oversight to the regional procurement offices, and they provide information technology improvements for acquisition. Next slide, please. So headquarters is comprised of a number of offices. It's Air and Radiation, the Office of Air and Radiation, the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, the Chief Financial Officer, Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, the General Counsel, the Inspector General, International and Tribal Affairs, Land Management and Emergency Management, Mission Support, Research and Development, and Water. Next slide, please. So the Office of Air and Radiation is concerned with pollution prevention and energy efficiency, indoor and outdoor air quality, industrial air pollution, pollution from vehicles and engines, radon, acid rain, stratospheric ozone depletion, and climate change and radiation protection. For contractors who wish to work with this office, they should be knowledgeable about the Clean Air Act, the Atomic Energy Act, Waste Isolation Pilot Plant Act, Land Withdrawal Act, and other applicable environmental laws. Next slide, please. The Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Protection intends to protect the public and the environment from potential risks from pesticides and toxic chemicals. They implement FIFRA, otherwise known as the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the Toxic Substance Control Act, and Pollution Prevention Act, again, as well as other statutes. Next slide, please. The Chief Financial Officer, and there's a lot of information on these slides, but I'm just kind of hone in on where you might want to have a chat with them, or you might be looking for this office for a certain procurement. But they have the responsibility for information technology planning, development, and deployment of financial and resource management systems for the EPA. Next slide, please. The Environment and Compliance Assurance Act office targets the most serious water, air, and chemical hazards. They work with the EPA's regional offices, and the acts that they are concerned with is the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, CERCLA or Superfund, Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Oil Pollution Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, and Toxic Substances Control Act. And with all procurements, they will ask if it's a mission procurement that you be knowledgeable in whatever law that they're trying to enforce, work through, and make sure that they're protecting the public. The General Counsel, next slide, please. The Office of General Counsel provides legal counsel to EPA policymakers and provide critical input to rules, regulations, and guidance and documents that are promulgated and issued to implement the agency's statutory obligations. They also provide legal support for the issuance of permits and the approval of state environmental programs. And with all of these offices, as we'll discuss later on in this presentation, it's important to know what you might be assisting them with for the concern that you might be, if you win one award with, say, OGC, that you might be excluded from actually enforcing. If you help them promulgate or develop the policy and provide guidance on that, you could potentially be excluded from an enforcement of that policy under another EPA contract. Next slide, please. The Inspector General is the Inspector General as he she is in all offices. They conduct independent audits, evaluations, and investigations, and make recommendations to promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and prevent and detect fraud, waste, abuse, mismanagement, and misconduct. And next slide, please. The Office of International and Tribal Affairs develops and implements policy and programs that protect the U.S. public health and environment, because they have to work across borders, and pollution knows no borders, and so they work with our other stakeholders around the world and within the agencies to see what they can do to minimize the impact of pollution on the U.S. Next slide, please. The Office of Land and Emergency Management is responsible and provides policy guidance and direction for EPA's emergency response and waste programs. They develop guidelines for the disposal of hazardous waste and underground storage tanks. They support state and local governments with a brownfields program. They respond to abandoned and active hazardous waste sites, accidental chemical releases, and encourage innovative technologies to address contaminated soil and groundwater. Next slide, please. The Office of Mission Support leads the EPA's core mission support functions to improve efficiency, coordination, and customer experience for internal customers, stakeholders, and the public, including the protection of EPA's facilities and other critical assets nationwide. Next slide, please. The Office of Research and Development conducts research for the EPA. They are organized into 6 research programs that identify the most pressing environmental health research needs. Next slide, please. The Office of Water provides a very critical function. They ensure that our drinking water is safe, and they restore and maintain oceans, watersheds, and their aquatic ecosystems to protect human health, support economic and recreational activities, and provide healthy habitat for fish, plants, and wildlife. They're responsible for implementing the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act and portions of the Coastal Zone Act Reauthorization Amendments of 1990, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Ocean Dumping Ban Act, Marine Protection Research Sanctuaries Act, and a host of others. They work directly with the 10 EPA regional offices, and they also help American Indian tribes to build capacity and water programs that can be ultimately delegated to the Indian tribes for implementation. Next slide, please. In looking at the EPA, it's important to kind of understand what mission support acquisitions are. And the EPA defines them as work that directly supports the core mission of the program office, such as regulation development, permitting or sampling, on-site laboratory support, research and development activities, and more. Next slide, please. It is also equally important to understand what EPA's remedial acquisition framework is. And the RAF is EPA's approach for acquiring national services to support EPA's Superfund remedial program. They include design and engineering services, remediation, environmental services and operations. The RAF contracts have been awarded, and they have a period of performance of 5 years with 5 one-year options. And currently there are task orders being competed amongst the region-specific awardees. There may be, however, opportunities for subcontracts with the awardees of the RAF contracts, and there is a listing on the EPA website of what contractors currently possess RAF contracts. Next slide, please. The following 3 slides basically break down for the headquarters what offices buy what. And so it goes, it goes from the detail of furniture, all offices can buy it, construction, all offices can buy it, A&E services, everybody except for the RAF type of work. And then it's RAF only under the RAF contracts. Laboratory equipment and equipment maintenance, all. Laboratory gases, all. IT equipment, etc., all. Next slide, please. Telecommunications goes to their information technology group, and they buy that. And so this is a very interesting slide that gives you an idea, if you want to provide support services, the requirements for you to, and the regulations that you're going to be addressing for support services or for telecommunications are going to be very different than from the regulations for the work that some of the program offices actually buy with regard to their mission. Next slide, please. And so, as I was leading in, mission support acquisitions, every office has it, and they will be, again, very different from your EPA general support. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go on, as I mentioned up front, to discuss the EPA's 10 regions and their geographic scope. I'm not going to go into detail on these slides because you can read them on your own, and you would be thoroughly grumpy if I read them to you, but it is kind of interesting what each region covers. Next slide, please. It's a busy slide, I know, but it gives you an idea of the scope of each region's obligations. Next slide, please. So the regional leadership and organization of each of the regions is generally broken down into a regional administrator, an air and radiation division, enforcement and compliance, laboratory services, land, chemicals, redevelopment, mission support, Superfund emergency management, and water division. Next slide, please. Though for some regions, they have unique programs that are specific to their regions, such as the Caribbean Environmental Protection Division, which is in Region 2, the Chesapeake Bay Program, which is in Region 3, the Gulf of Mexico, which is covered by Region 4, and the Great Lakes National Program, which is covered by Region 5. Next slide, please. So in going through this, you might wonder, where do I find EPA business opportunities? And the answer to that question is on this slide, not necessarily in the usual and custom place on sam.gov. Next slide, please. So EPA does reverse auctions on Unison Marketplace. They use it for their simplified product purchases under $250,000 through a pilot program they refer to as SNAP. And through SNAP, they procure lab supplies and equipment, some IT hardware and software, and additional stuff. Next slide, please. Since March 12, 2014, the EPA decided that they would only publish their procurement opportunities on FedConnect. They use sam.gov to publicize notices of SNAP or other notices, award, pre-solicitation notices, sources sought notices, sole source, and a few solicitations. The other place that you can find EPA solicitations are on GSA's eBuy, where there are GSA FSS contractors who handle, or the scope of their contract contains services and or products of interest to the EPA. Next slide, please. And if you want to know, if you want a better idea of what EPA might be purchasing within the next year or so, the EPA posts current opportunities, awarded contracts, and canceled procurements on this website. And you can search this, this website by record number, end user, procurement office, dollar range, NAICS code, solicitation issue date, or target award date. It's a very, very interesting data. It's very interesting data that the EPA provides to help contractors determine what they might like to pursue. Next slide, please. So what do you, as the potential contractor for the EPA, need to know? First, the EPA's T's and C's are very dependent on the type of contract that the EPA office, an EPA office issuing the contract. For example, the emergency response contract, the responsible office is the Land and Emergency Management, and the range of services that they may require can go from oil spills to Asian carp crossing the country. Next slide, please. As with all government procurements, and the EPA is no different, you have to read the solicitation. Don't assume it's boilerplate, and don't assume that an EPAR is a FAR, is a DFAR, etc. You've got to look at it, and you've got to understand it, and you've got to understand what your obligations are with regard to technical requirements, standard business practices, and whether those need to change within your organization, and what the current market is for the supplies or services that the EPA is seeking. Next slide, please. So there are certain EPARs that you should know and you should be aware of, and those are the organizational conflicts of interest, conflict of interest certification, notification of conflict of interest regarding personnel, and perhaps most importantly, the limitation on future contracting. And under that particular clause, the EPA and the contractor agree that the contractor is in fact restricted from future contracting with the EPA where the contractor developed the statement of work. The contractor is not able into a contractor with another party with respect to CERCLA activities where the contractor worked, or work that may jeopardize CERCLA enforcement activities where the contractor previously worked. Next slide, please. So under the limitation on future contracting clause, throwing that in, I actually did a little duplicate here. That clause is adjusted based on the type of contract that the EPA is posting. And so each alternate to that clause identifies a type of contract that the EPA has, or if it's headquarters support or site specific. And that clause has to be flowed down in all subcontracts except for non-discretionary technical or engineering studies that the contractor may require. Next slide, please. As discussed earlier with all of the headquarters offices, there are a lot of technical disciplines that the EPA requires. You have to know the environmental laws and regulations. You as a contractor will likely be required to know state laws and regulations, and how to work with the state government. You'll have to know how the Stafford Act applies, and you will have to know, given the level of construction that a particular contract may require, you'll have to be knowledgeable about Davis-Bacon and who on your team will have to be paid in accordance with Davis-Bacon or is covered by Davis-Bacon. Again, you should read the RFPs carefully, as they can contain, and I hope nobody, but they can contain mistakes. All agencies make mistakes, all contracting officers make mistakes, and it's important to know that they should be corrected prior to proposal submission. Put in those questions, point out the mistakes, point out the ambiguities, make sure that the RFP is as clear as it can be and as unambiguous as it can be with regards to the EPA's clauses and expectations for its contractors. And be aware that the limitation of future contracting clause can go both ways. It can prevent a contractor from working at the headquarters, from working for the regions, or prevent a contractor who's working for a region from working for headquarters. And all contractors must have policies and procedures in place to not unintentionally exclude themselves from future EPA contracting opportunities. And that concludes my presentation for today. Thank you very much for being here and being part of this program.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. It was a great presentation, nice overview of the EPA. I actually learned a couple things about where to find opportunities that I wasn't aware of in the past. So thank you so much for pointing some of those nuances out. And obviously, yeah, there's a lot of pieces to keep abreast of when you are working with EPA. So if you guys have questions about Holly's presentation, anything about EPA or federal contracting, you've got Holly's contact information here on the screen, her email address and phone number. Today's presentation has been recorded, so you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording usually within about 24 hours. You can also go to our website to find it, as well as our YouTube channel. And I believe that is it. So thanks again, Holly. It was great to have you with us. And thanks to all the attendees who took time out of their day to join us.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. And we'll see everybody hopefully on Friday for the EPA Playbook Series, which we will have a representative from the EPA's Small Business Office. We'll have Ms. Archiza Meehan from FedMine, who's going to be covering some specific opportunities for small businesses, talk about subcontracting and other ways to work with the EPA. Registration link for that's on our website. Okay, thanks everybody.